Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to take a look at this invisible system that brings us pretty much everything we buy, our phones, our food, you name it. It's a system that was built on this amazing idea of perfect efficiency. But that raises a really big question. Has that relentless quest for perfection actually made our global economy dangerously brittle? So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the efficiency dream. Then, how that dream created a system on the edge. After that, what happens when the shock hits? And from there, the big shift from time to case, and what the resilient future might actually look like. All right, let's jump in. So our story doesn't actually begin with fragility and things breaking. Nope. It begins with this really powerful idea, a philosophy that promised to get rid of every single bit of waste and create the perfect production line. So what exactly is just-in-time manufacturing? Well, at its core, the idea, often called JIT, is actually pretty simple. It basically says that any inventory, any parts or materials, just sitting around not being used right this second for production or sales, well, that's just waste. The whole goal is maximum efficiency. Parts show up exactly when you need them and not a single moment before. And you really can't overstate what a huge shift this was from the old way of doing things. I mean, before JIT, the model was basically just in case. Companies would have these enormous warehouses, right, stockpiled with tons of inventory, just in case demand suddenly went up or a supplier dropped the ball. JIT completely flipped that on its head. It got rid of the big warehouses and created this super lean, super responsive system. It was a total revolution in efficiency. But there's always a catch, isn't there? This incredible efficiency, this perfectly tuned machine, it came with a pretty big hidden cost. Because by getting rid of all the buffers and all the safety nets, what we ended up with was a system that was perfectly optimized for calm, stable times, but was also incredibly fragile the moment things got rough. And, this isn't just us looking back with 2020 hindsight. People were sounding the alarm on this for a while. I mean, check out this quote from Cranfield University. It's from all the way back in 2002. It just goes to show you that experts knew, long before the big crises we've seen recently, that the very things that made these networks so lean and efficient were also making them incredibly vulnerable. See, part of the problem is that the phrase supply chain is kind of misleading. It's not really a simple chain anymore. What we have now are these massive, sprawling global networks. And because everything is so complex and interconnected, a single failure, one tiny problem in one factory doesn't just stay there. It can cascade through the whole system, causing disruptions literally on the other side of the planet. And a bunch of major business trends just poured gasoline on this fire. Globalization, outsourcing key jobs, and this big push to reduce the number of suppliers, sometimes relying on just a single company for a critical part. You've also got centralized production, these massive factories built to do one thing really well. And look, from a pure efficiency perspective, every single one of those moves makes sense. But when you put them all together, whoa, you've just created a system with a ton of concentrated risk. And this creates what we call supply chain vulnerability. This is way bigger than just one supplier having a bad month. We're talking about an exposure to really serious disturbances. And the scary part is, they can come from anywhere. They can be risks from within the supply chain, like a key factory going offline, or they can be risks external to it, things like natural disasters, political turmoil, or, as we all learned the hard way, a pandemic. So what happens when a massive, totally unexpected shock, like a global pandemic, slams into this perfectly tuned, hyper-efficient system? Well, the whole world got a front row seat to that very experiment. Now, here's an interesting question. If the pandemic was mainly a demand shock, with people staying home, not buying stuff, shouldn't prices have just fallen across the board? That's what you'd expect, right? Widespread deflation. But the data tells a completely different story about what was actually going on. Just look at the snapshot of U.S. inflation from the first few months of 2020. It's fascinating. On one side, prices for things like energy and transportation went down, which makes sense. But on the other side, wow, prices for essential goods, food, medical supplies, all that stuff, they didn't just stay the same, they surged by 10%. That wasn't a demand shock. That was a clear signal that the supply chains were failing. And it wasn't just a few things here and there. The data is super clear on this. More than 60% of all the product categories that the government tracks saw prices increase during the peak of the 2020 lockdowns. I mean, that's powerful evidence that this was a massive, widespread supply failure. The system was just buckling under the pressure. Okay, so this whole crisis really served as a massive global wake-up call. It forced businesses, economists, everyone to completely rethink the way we do things. People started urgently searching for a new model, one that puts just as much value on survival and being robust as it does on being efficient. So you can really see this evolution in thinking. The conversation started shifting away from just in time and back toward just in case, keeping some strategic buffers on hand. But it also gave rise to an even more, let's say, extreme idea, just in worst case. And that's exactly what it sounds like. The goal is pure survival. You design your whole system to handle the absolute worst case scenario, even if it looks kind of inefficient day to day. So what does a truly resilient supply chain even look like? Well, most of the thinking boils down to these 4 key pillars. You need agility, which is just the ability to pivot and react really quickly. You need redundancy. Yep, the exact thing JIT tried to get rid of. That means having extra inventory or more than one supplier on purpose. You need visibility, so you can actually see what's going on across the whole network. And finally, you need flexibility, which is about being able to change your actual processes when you have to. And this is really the key takeaway. When you're dealing with deep uncertainty, these big, unpredictable shocks, you have to change your strategy. The smartest thing to do isn't to try and predict the future. It's to build a system that is robust enough to survive any future. The goal is just to make sure it never completely fails. So what does the future look like? I think it's really important to say this up front. The future is not about abandoning just-in-time and going back to the old ways. It's not about throwing away all those amazing efficiency gains. It's about augmenting JIT, making it smarter and a whole lot stronger. And this table does a great job of showing what that actually means. We're shifting from the traditional JIT we've been talking about to a new, digitally enhanced version. So instead of minimal stock, you have dynamic buffers that adjust using real-time data. Instead of old forecasts, you're using AI and IoT data to predict what's coming. You're moving from single sourcing to having multiple suppliers. The key difference? It's all about shifting from being reactive to being proactive. And for a perfect case study, you just have to look at Toyota, the company that literally invented just-in-time. After major earthquakes in Japan exposed how vulnerable their system was, they were forced to adapt. Now, they didn't abandon their philosophy, but they evolved it. They created a huge database to map out their entire network. For better visibility, they started using multiple suppliers for high-risk parts, and they built up inventory buffers for certain components. It's a really pragmatic evolution of their own system. But this means we all have to make a pretty big mental shift. We have to start understanding that something that looks like inefficiency during normal times is actually the price we pay for robustness. That extra inventory, that second supplier that costs a little more, that's not waste. That's an insurance policy. It's an investment in survival for when things go wrong. And that leaves us with a really fundamental question to think about. For decades, the entire global economy chased efficiency above everything else, and we saw what happened. So now the question is, what's the right balance between efficiency and resilience? What trade-offs are we as businesses, as societies, as individuals willing to make for a world that's a little more stable?